Good morning and welcome to Jew in the City Speaks with your host, Allison Josephs, also known as Jew in the City. If you have been awake or on planet Earth in the last couple months, you have noticed that attacks on Jews are increasing. Attacks on Orthodox Jews were already going up over the last several years to the point where walking around being visibly Jewish was feeling kind of scary. Kosher stores were attacked. Hanukkah parties inside of private homes were attacked. The Jersey City shooting, it did end up in a kosher store, but the original target was a yeshiva. And so the feeling of being Jewish and under attack has been, I think, the feeling of visibly dressed Jews for a while. And in the last few months, as an excuse, as purely an excuse, with the Gaza attack in Israel, I'm not going to call it the Gaza war. I'm going to say when Gaza attacked Israel and Jews refused to die, did that awful thing of not just sitting back and letting missiles explode into civilian homes and murder people. It then became more and more popular around the world to just attack Jews everywhere, to listen for people speaking Hebrew, to go up to the street and ask people who weren't even visibly dressed Jewish if they were Jewish. And these attacks have been increasing all over the world. This is obviously concerning to everyone. There's an amazing organization that did something pretty bold and pretty exciting to fight back. And if you haven't seen them around yet, go to Times Square, just look up and you'll see. The organization is called JewBelong, and we're so excited to talk to its co-founder today, Archie Gottesman. Archie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So before we talk about the JewBelong or Jew Be Gone campaign, it's very clever. And just want to say, I love the fact that you created an organization with the word Jew. I have a similar feeling about that. Tell us what JewBelong is and kind of what made you decide to start it and when.
So JewBelong is an organization that is online. It's a platform for resources and for education for people who are, they're Jewish, but they don't always feel within the community. And I really would bet that a lot of your listeners maybe would not necessarily be JewBelong, they may not be JewBelongers, as I affectionately call them, but I bet that they all know people who are, because those of us who are in the Jewish community, so often I hear from people who are like, JewBelong isn't really for me because, we always celebrate Shabbat and we have a traditionally Jewish home. But, my sister, it really doesn't really live a Jewish life. Her husband's not Jewish and they're doing something different. Or my cousin, or there's a lot of people within the Jewish community who take a look at JewBelong and they say, this may not be for me. I love it though, but it is for someone else. And I have a feeling that may really resonate with a lot of your audience, because the JewBelong community are people who just feel just a little bit on the outside. They are by no means, they are not anti-Semitic. They don't hate anything about Judaism. They just maybe didn't get the education that some of us got. And also sometimes there are people who may not be Jewish, but might be living a Jewish life because they're in an interfaith relationship and just, they're bringing up Jewish children and they have a Jewish home. But, it's JewBelong really believes in broadening the tent and welcoming everybody on their Jewish journey, whatever that journey is.
Amazing. What was the motivation for starting JewBelong? Like when, why, how did you decide that it was time to do something?
So interestingly enough, I was brought up in a conservative upbringing out in Morristown, New Jersey, and was living my life. And I fell in love with my now husband. This story is about almost 30 years ago, 30 years old. And Gary was brought up United Methodist. And I said to him, when we started, it was clear that we might be falling in love. And I said, listen, I'm going to marry somebody Jewish. It was very important to me. It was just, and I'm not terribly observant, but I'm just hardwired. Like I'm Jewish. Like it's really a deep part of who I am. And I said, I'm going to marry somebody Jewish. And that's like part of the deal. And he was amazing. And he said, fine, then I'll convert. And I said, well, it's really pretty complicated. It's a lot more complicated, being Jewish. But anyway, to his word, the man's amazing. He converted, and took a couple of years. And anyway, and then I had honestly the fortunate experience of watching Judaism through Gary's eyes. And I really felt like, wow, here's this amazing man. And I know that, sometimes Jewish people, we complain that our numbers are shrinking, about like whatever, because of whether it was the Holocaust or whether there's assimilation or, oh no, there's not enough Jews. So here I am like, guys, here's this amazing guy who has joined us, his own free will. And I didn't feel like Judaism was as welcoming to someone like Gary as it should be. And I wanted it to be that. And I'm a business person. I've been in business for a long time. And it almost was like there was something off with our branding. And it was not as welcoming or as warm. And I wanted to try to change that. I wanted Judaism, which sometimes leads with, it can be intimidating to people. And this is nobody's fault, by the way. This is just what it looked like. It can be intimidating. It can be, oh, it's all about the rules, not about the love and the values and the importance of Judaism. And I wanted to try to change that. I wanted to put the love and the humanity and the values and the, some of the amazing traditions of being Jewish in the forefront. And that's where Judaism always leads. We always say that we give you the good stuff. And it's not the superficial stuff, by the way, but it's the important. And we really, really try to do that. So in a way, if I hadn't met and fallen in love with Gary, I don't think I would have necessarily seen what Judaism looked like to someone new. So that was really helpful to do that. And that opened my eyes to lots of things. So that was, yeah.
Beautiful.
And
I think there's a lot of shared space between JewBelong and Jew in the City, in that we're trying to have people get a fresh look at what Jewish life can look like. If it feels, what we're doing is essentially, if the Orthodox world feels off-putting or, a place that you can't sort of understand, or you feel like they've been kind of closed off. I understand that, that's how a lot of Jews feel in terms of like, in between denominations. So I certainly love the idea of more inclusivity and making it engaging, and also using great marketing to get people's attention. I think at the end of the day, too much Judaism has been given over in a way that's kind of boring. You said it's nobody's fault, and I don't want to go around blaming, but isn't the Hebrew school system broken? It's interesting. Archie and I realized that we grew up going to the same synagogue, so we have that background together. But and I don't think anyone tried to break Hebrew school, but I think sort of the current state of affairs of sort of the high holiday Hebrew school system is not working for a lot of people. What do you think?
I agree with you. I don't think it's working for a lot of people. And I think that there are a lot of really well-meaning, good people who are trying to fix it. And I do think that there is, there's somehow or another, at least my experience and our shared experience, because we did have that. It wasn't my experience, although it must have done something good, because here I am today talking about it all years later. It certainly stuck with me in some respect. But I do think that it was, even as a kid growing up in a Hebrew school situation, it was easy to feel like an outsider. It's funny. There's something about Judaism. It's easy to feel like, oh, you're a better Jew than me, and you do this more and you do more things, so that must mean that you're better, and all of that stuff. And I know that that's a part in all different spaces in Judaism. It's not necessarily having to just do with whether it's Orthodoxy or conservative or reform. So yeah, I think you're right about the Hebrew school needing to be fixed. And I just think it's really important what happens to our next generation and how they're educated and how they feel like they own it and they love it, instead of feeling like, oh, my kid hates Hebrew school. It's like, and then it's kind of a joke because everyone says, yeah, of course, everyone hates Hebrew school, but that's crazy. That really shouldn't be the way that it has to be.
I would also say that now is the time, it's the 3 weeks, it's the time that we're leading up to Tisha B'Av, which is sort of marked the destruction of the temple and, the beginning of our exile. And it was sparked due to baseless hatred. So I think, talking about Jews belonging during this time and trying to help people feel included is so on the mark, because the more that we can kind of get past our differences and find ways to welcome each other in, I think we can heal thousands of years of problems. Something that we spoke about before, you mentioned that, the organization is not coming from an Orthodox perspective. And sometimes Orthodox Jews open up their mouths and, sort of offer their opinion about the halachic status of something, or, if it's not quote unquote to their standards. I guess I just want to speak to that point as a Orthodox voice, speaking to anyone listening that may listen and not realize this. You don't have to say everything out loud. To be a mensch is sort of the most underlying principle of being a Jew. And just because you may not agree with something, or may not be part of your framework of how you see Judaism, if you, live through a halachic framework, doesn't mean that other people are interested in your opinion, and doesn't mean that your opinion might not be hurtful. And so something that, we teach to our kids is that we can both believe that we're doing the right thing. We can believe it's true. And we can also believe that we don't get to tell other people what their truth is or what their way of life is. And it's kind of a complicated way to exist. And yet I think we have to be able to hold on to complicated truths, because if we don't, we won't let people belong. We'll stay in exile, and we'll continue to spend our lives running. And I feel like exile is kind of a nice segue over to this JewBelong or Jew Be Gone campaign you're doing.
Sorry.
Yeah, so tell me about how did so what is JewBelong or Jew Be Gone? When did you come up with it? Tell us about some of those amazing billboards that you're putting around.
Okay, I would love to. Can I share a story just that you really just inspired me to share with you before
Sure.
I jump into the JewBelong? Okay, so and there's so many, because you just said that so beautifully, and we really share. I think when Jews just start having conversations about this, I once spoke about how to have a kick-ass Seder in New York up at the JCC. And I was talking, and it was mostly to a JewBelong kind of an audience, people who wouldn't be having a Seder, maybe might be going to someone else's, but wouldn't necessarily have their own. And JewBelong has a fabulous Haggadah on our website, and many people really love it. So while I'm talking, there are these two guys who were kind of close up to the front near where I was speaking. It was a live event, and they were wearing kippot, and they were talking to each other during the middle of my talk. And I was like, oh boy, I must have said something wrong. And JewBelong has this word called Juberist. And all of a sudden, it's when you feel like you're going to say something wrong, you're saying something wrong Jewish. You're just getting it wrong. And all of a sudden, even though I'm the speaker, I literally started getting Juberist, thinking like, oh my God, those guys are like more Jewish than me. I must be saying something wrong. Oh no. And like, it was just in the back of my head, and I kept going with the talk, and it finished. So anyway, the talk is over, and I'm sitting and talking to different people after, coming up to ask questions and things like that. And the two guys come over, and they were so nice. And one of them says, oh my gosh, that was great. That was really interesting. It was really funny. This Juberist thing, because I'd been explaining what Juberism is. He said, we go to Yeshiva University, and this Juberist thing happens to us all the time. And I said to him, I was like, you go to YU, guys, dude, you're like the ground zero of Juberism of others. How is that? How can Juberism even exist at YU? And he's like, oh, Archie, like, you have no idea. He's like, there's always some way that, Judaism can be a little more, a little harder, a little more observant. And I loved him for being kind of funny and honest, and just, it was really interesting. And I learned then that, like, you don't have to be perfect, which is, you just have to sort of try with your heart with Judaism. And I think that, anyway, it really helped when he said that, like, they get Juberist at Yeshiva University. I was like, wow, that's actually really cool to hear. Anyway, so the reason that JewBelong, which is really about joyous Judaism and what we were just talking about, started talking about anti-Semitism, frankly, is because of exactly how you introed the show, because it is happening. Anti-Semitism is getting worse. It is becoming normalized in many circles. People just, they say anti-Semitic things and they're not ashamed of it, and they're brave about it. It's insane. And JewBelong as an organization, I really felt like we don't have a choice. Like, to be perfectly honest, I don't understand why every Jewish organization isn't, shouting from the rooftops about anti-Semitism and how bad it is. Because if we don't, I really believe that if we don't pay attention to it and we don't really stand for something better, then it is going to get worse. I just think that, listen, the Jews have been down this road before. It is, for some reason, we can be scapegoats. People don't like us. And of course, not all people, but there are anti-Semites out there. And standing up loud and proud and fighting against that is just really, really important, because I think they're bullies, and bullies, go after people who don't fight back. And it's awful. So that's why we decided to start JewBelong or JewBegone, which is really a pivot for our organization to be talking about anti-Semitism.
And share with us some of the billboards. I know one of them says, we're only 75 years past the gas chambers, so no, a billboard like this isn't an overreaction. Did I get that about right?
You did. You got that right. One of them says, oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, continue, yeah.
Yeah, one says, I promise to love being Jewish 10 times more than anyone hates me for it.
Really powerful.
One of them says,
another one that said, if you think that anti-Semitism isn't real, try walking around in the yarmulke and see how it goes. That one, I actually appreciate that so much, as a Jew in the city, to a JewBelong, because I think the Orthodox community, again, now we're at the point now that Jews anywhere are getting attacked, and they're asking for us if we're Jewish, but those of us that sort of go out every day and put on that Jewish looking garb, we feel so at risk. So what kind of feedback are you getting from these billboards?
We are getting such positive feedback. Almost, there's everything from, thank goodness people are talking out. Like, it's great to see that there's loud and proud. We are getting a lot of comments from people who are not Jewish, who are just really happy to see it, saying, I'm not Jewish, but I hate anti-Semitism. I've seen it in my, people tell stories about how they've seen it, and they are really happy to be allies to the Jewish community. We're just getting, there's just that, billboards about anti-Semitism, not that common. And there is this almost this kind of communal, like, wow, we're so just really happy and proud to see that. And yeah, it's our world right now. It's the world's very funny. There's a lot of tweeting, and social media is so big, and the Jewish community is small. We need to be extra loud about being against anti-Semitism and using allyship when possible, because there are plenty of people out there who are not anti-Semitic. Most people are not anti-Semitic. Right. But it's a matter of pointing it out and saying that's wrong, and we're not going to stand for it.
The point that you're saying that every Jewish organization should be speaking about anti-Semitism right now. I look at these continuous attacks on Jews, and like I said, the majority of them on Orthodox Jews. There was a Chabad rabbi stabbed in Boston last week. No national news coverage. The story barely touched. If this was any other minority, it would be such a different treatment, which is just so frustrating. And, even on the subject of media, Orthodox depictions in media, which is something that we do a lot, and we try to call out the sort of obsession that media has with us. We find it so difficult for anyone to listen and to care. And so there's a billboard in Manhattan certainly gets attention, and it sort of forces a conversation in a way, that using social media may not as well. Have you found people are sharing it on social media? Like, where do you find is sort of the biggest coverage, in traditional media or via social media? Kind of, are you measuring those metrics?
Social, by far. Social, the good thing about compelling advertising, which I learned back when I was, I did the branding for Manhattan Mini Storage for many, many, many years. And we learned how to use pop culture. And, you know, we that was part of our narrative, just to sell a commodity like storage. So doing the same with anti-Semitism is by saying things like, one of our lines that's very popular is, being woke and anti-Semitic is like being a vegan who eats veal. And that gets people share. When people see lines that they're like, oh, that's an interesting thing to say. Like, that's, do you know, it's just one of those, it's a way of saying it. Like, you can just say stop anti-Semitism. That might work too. But by just adding a little wit to it, a little like what they say, oh God, that's such a good, you know, that's a funny way of saying stop anti-Semitism, or a more compelling way. They get shared a lot. So that's what's happening is on social media. And then that's the way our media world goes now, is when things get spoken about, then it will get picked up by more traditional media. And we hope it's more. I mean, I love speaking with you today because this is a way of getting the word out about the campaign and about anti-Semitism.
But it's, again, if other groups do seem to get more attention and more care. And I mean, I agree with you, sort of a similar thing besides using Jew and, you know, sort of catchy marketing angles on social media with the hope of getting picked up in traditional media. It's not so easy. It's not so compelling it's compelling, that the messages are compelling, but somehow it's hard to make the case to get picked up and matter. And I guess maybe it's that complicated nature of being a Jew, of sort of like, we seem like we're doing too well in order for people to actually care about us or feel like we're oppressed. And it's sort of like the curse of too much success, or people thinking that, you know, anti-Semitism ended with the Holocaust. What about, I mean, I've seen some negative responses from Jews, you know, from some of the stuff that we've put out, and it could be because we're, you know, from an Orthodox angle and kind of a direction that is getting people more annoyed. But I've heard people actually victim blame, where they make comments like, well, you know, he could have worn a baseball cap, or he could have, you know, cut off his payas. Is there anything, it could be that just because we're sort of going with that more Orthodox angle that, that, you know, we've gotten that sort of response. Have you seen anything like that, or it's pretty much been positive overall?
No, we see, you know, the anti-Semitism that JewBelong receives, there's plenty. I don't at all want to sound like, oh, everything's fine and everybody loves us and they think that it's really catchy. We get everything from, you know, Hitler should have finished the job and, you know, should have burned you in an oven, to, you know, you're killing Palestinian babies and drinking their blood. Like, it's very, but I find it incredibly troubling. I find it horrible. And I think that the thing to do, and it's not easy, but the focus is that the haters, the far haters, they're always going to hate. They just are. I mean, that's just like, I don't know, man, we can't fix the entire world. But what we can do is know that most people are not, you know, they're good people. And it is really a matter of sort of speaking to those who are, you know, the masses who may not, you know, who may say things like, oh, I mean, like, there's terrible things, like, you know, people still say, well, I'm going to Jew you down. And because Jews, like, that's a terrible thing to say. And people should be like, should call it out and say, that's not an okay thing to say. We have on our website, this might be fascinating. I was blown away when I read it, is we asked our social media to, ask people to share experiences when they felt anti-Semitism. And we have hundreds of responses, and they are on our website under the anti-Semitism section on JewBelong.com. And we had to organize them by 3 sections. There's one called Pennies, You Killed Jesus, and Horns, because so many people emailed and said that, you know, oh, my school teacher, my 3rd grade teacher wanted to see where my horns were. I mean, it's crazy, but it's just by really shining a light on it. One of the women who worked said JewBelong is not Jewish. And she read it and she's like, oh my God, I had no idea. And I said, and trust me, I was a little surprised too by some of it, but just by sort of putting it out there, like, this is awful. It's not okay. There was a tremendous amount of pain in a lot of the stories, but like, I'd rather that there's some light shined on it than hiding in the, pretending it didn't happen. It's really interesting reading. And, if not all, it's a little heartbreaking too, but I think there's something cathartic about about people showing their vulnerability. Many more. We got more that are not even on the website. And people said, thank you for asking. Like, thanks. Nobody ever asked me before. And I haven't told anybody this story, except I'm writing it to you at JewBelong. And, thank you. And there's just something very powerful about that.
I love it. We've got about 2 minutes to go in closing and sort of thinking more along the Jewish unity with Tisha B'Av approaching theme. I sort of spoke to the Orthodox Jews that need to just kind of keep their mouths shut and, walk around with their mensch first before any of their strong opinions. What about on the other side? Do you have any thoughts about, because, when our enemies come after us, we have to kind of like come together and be united. But when they're not, we do a pretty good job of division. So do you have any thoughts from, the non-Orthodox denominations on them, kind of how can they approach their Orthodox brethren maybe in a more open way? So, to make them feel like they belong.
That's a beautiful question. Really, it's with beautiful curiosity, and to get over ourselves. Like, sometimes, and I'm speaking to sort of the non-Orthodox Jewish world, sometimes this is it, like, people will really share with me, well, I don't feel like that. Like, they're like, it sounds crazy, but I think that there's people who are Jewish and not, let's call it observant Orthodox, wherever they are in the continuum, they might be intimidated. It's not that they're like many people are intimidated. They're like, oh, I can't go because I'm not a good enough Jew and you're a better Jew than I am. Oh, Allison, look at you. You're like, they think it. I've had this conversation with rabbis who are, I said, the fact I can even talk to you, Rabbi, is kind of a miracle, because like, I'm so intimidated by you. And now I'm kind of over it because I've been doing JewBelong for a while. But I think that some of the walls that we put up the reasons are crazy. They're not because there's like, we don't like, it's just like, oh, you're better than me, so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut, which is crazy. And I think people should just get over whatever imaginary stuff is going on in their head. And I've had conversations my sister is, modern Orthodox, and she loves JewBelong, but because she gets the idea. So it's really sort of just realizing that some of the stories we tell ourselves about Judaism and different movements, it's their stories. They're our own silly stuff. Like, we're all at this time in the world, we need to unite and just be proud and Jewish and bold and loving. And that really matters.
Amazing. That's a wonderful note to close on. Archie, Gottesman, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for JewBelong. And thanks for speaking to me today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
And you can catch us same time, same place next week. Bye-bye.